I was sitting at my kitchen table, the glow of a small Christmas tree flickering in the corner when my phone buzzed with a message that would change everything. My son Marcus, 34 years old, the boy I had raised with my own two hands after his father died, the boy I had worked 2 nursing jobs to put through college, sent me a text that was only 1 sentence long. Mom, you don't need to come this year. Isabella and I have everything covered. We weren't expecting you for Christmas. I read it once. I read it twice. I whispered it aloud as if somehow the sound of my own voice would make it less cruel, less final. But it only made it worse. The words did not tremble. They did not soften. They cut straight through me like cold steel. Christmas, the one day I had always cherished, the day I imagined would keep us together as a family, no matter how busy or distant life became, had been taken from me by my own child. For a moment, I could not breathe. My hand hovered above the phone as though it might burn me. I remembered the nights I stayed awake with Marcus when he was sick, holding his hand while the bills piled up on the counter. I remembered the years I skipped vacations, birthdays, even new clothes because every dollar I had went into his future. And now that same boy told me not to come, not to bring my cooking, not to bring myself. I looked at the tree in the corner, decorated with faded ornaments I had saved from when he was 5 years old. The light twinkled, mocking me, but grief turned quickly into rage. My chest tightened not from sadness anymore, but from fury. I was 62 years old. Gloria Mitchell, a black woman who had given her entire life to her son, and he had reduced me to nothing more than an afterthought. We weren't expecting you, as if I were some stray guest, some burden instead of his mother. I clenched my jaw until my teeth ached, and I reached for the laptop that sat on the table. With trembling fingers, I opened my banking app. My password still worked. My access was still intact because for 5 years I had been the one transferring $80,000 every year to him. It was not a loan, not an accident, but a choice I made out of love, a choice I thought would secure his stability and his gratitude. Instead, it had only bought his silence, his arrogance, and now his betrayal. The screen glowed bright against the dim kitchen, the numbers staring back at me. I scrolled through transaction after transaction, each one a reminder of my sacrifice. $80,000 for his mortgage, $80,000 for his luxury lifestyle, $80,000 that had come out of my veins and bones, out of every double shift I had ever worked. My hands did not shake now. They steadied sharp with determination. I hovered over the button that would end it all. 1 click. That was all it would take to cut him off. My son said he did not expect me for Christmas. Fine. Then he would no longer expect my money either. I pressed the button. Confirmation appeared on the screen. The allowance was gone. I leaned back in my chair, heart pounding, but for the first time in years, I felt clarity. No tears rolled down my cheeks. No begging rose in my throat. Only silence, heavy and liberating. My son had tried to erase me from the most sacred holiday of the year, but I had erased the very foundation of his entitled life. As I sat there, the clock ticking toward midnight, I thought about Maria, my late husband. He would have told me to stop years ago to let Marcus stand on his own 2 feet, but I had been blinded by love, by hope, by the dream that one day he would thank me. Instead, he had given me exile. But tonight, I had given him justice. The tiny apartment was quiet, but the silence no longer mocked me. It empowered me. For the first time, I realized that Christmas was not about Marcus deciding if I was worthy of a seat at his table. It was about me deciding that I was worthy of respect. And respect could never be bought with $80,000. So I closed the laptop, poured myself a glass of water, and whispered into the empty room, "Merry Christmas, Gloria." The words did not sting. They soothed. Because for the first time, I was no longer afraid of being unwanted. I had made sure that the only person who would feel unwanted from now on was the son who had forgotten the value of his mother. That was the night everything shifted. That was the night my revenge began. I need you to understand what it meant for me to cut off that allowance, because it was not just numbers on a screen, not just digits moving from one account to another. It was years of my life, Years of my body breaking down under fluorescent lights in hospital corridors, years of aching feet and aching back from 12-hour shifts, years of swallowing exhaustion with a cup of cold coffee before heading out to the night job. My name is Gloria Mitchell. I am 62 years old, and I spent 35 years as a nurse, often working 2 jobs to keep food on the table and my boy's future secure. I had patients who screamed at me, who cursed me, who clutched my hands with fear as they left this world, and I carried every one of those moments home in my chest. But when I saw Marcus sleeping safely in his bed, when I saw him growing, I told myself it was all worth it. I was not born into wealth. I was born into a working-class black family in Alabama where every dollar mattered and every bill came with a price and sweat. My parents never owned a house. They rented, they moved often, they sacrificed what little they had to give me schooling. I swore when I became a mother I would give my child more than what I had, and so when Marcus came into my life, I made that vow like it was scripture. I would never let him go hungry, never let him feel the sting of poverty the way I had. I wore old coats through the winter. I stitched shoes together when they tore. I learned to stretch a pot of beans for a week. But Marcus, he never had to know that struggle. I built walls around him with my labor so he would never see it. When college came, he said he wanted to be a doctor. I smiled even though my stomach twisted. Tuition was $40,000 a year. My salary as a nurse barely reached that for 12 months of labor. But I told him, "Baby, you focus on your books. Mama will handle the rest." I picked up more shifts. I skipped meals. I let my car run on fumes. I wrote checks to that university until my fingers cramped. $40,000 for tuition. Another $10,000 for books, for rent, for food. Year after year, I wrote those checks while the roof of my own home leaked when it rained. And when he struggled, when he said he was not sure he could make it, I reminded him of who he was. I told him, "Marcus, you are strong, you are smart, you are meant to stand taller than me." And he graduated not as a doctor, but with a business degree that I paid every cent for. He smiled on that stage cap tilted diploma in hand, and I cried tears of joy. I thought it was the beginning of a new chapter where he would finally see me, thank me, stand beside me as an equal. But gratitude never came. Instead came the demands. He wanted an apartment in the city. I co-signed. I paid the down payment $25,000. He wanted a new car because the old one embarrassed him. I took out a small loan, covered $12,000. He racked up credit card debt, and when collectors called, I was the one who answered. I was the one who scraped the money together to silence those calls. Then came Isabella with her manicured nails and her disdain for anything that smelled of hard work. She smiled when I paid for their wedding caterer, smiled when I covered the honeymoon flights, smiled when I handed them an envelope with $10,000 in cash because I wanted them to start their life without debt. She smiled, but her eyes never softened toward me, and Marcus, blinded by her, never noticed. So I created the allowance, $80,000 a year every year, so they would never struggle. I told myself it was temporary, that once Marcus established himself, he would no longer need me. But 1 year became 2. 2 became 5, and instead of independence, they grew dependent. $80,000 to keep the mortgage afloat. $80,000 to cover car payments, gym memberships, weekend trips to Aspen. And every time I transferred that money, I whispered, "This is love. This is sacrifice." What did I receive in return? Last Christmas I arrived with sweet potato pie, the same recipe my mother passed down the dish Marcus used to beg for when he was little. But Isabella wrinkled her nose and said, "Your food is too greasy. We prefer organic catering." They placed me on a folding chair by the back door while her parents sat at the head of the table. Marcus said nothing. He laughed with them, toasted champagne, and I sat in the cold draft holding my paper plate, pretending not to hear the whispers. I told myself maybe next year would be different. Maybe he would remember who held him through nights of fever, who worked until her hands cracked to put shoes on his feet. Maybe he would look at me with the pride I had always dreamed of. Instead, this year I received that message. That sentence that broke me. "We weren't expecting you for Christmas." It was not just a message. It was a declaration that I was no longer family, that all my sacrifices had been erased, wiped clean by the arrogance of a son who thought $80,000 came without cost. He thought love was endless, unconditional, and unappreciated. He thought wrong. That is why when I pressed that button and cut him off, it was not just financial. It was spiritual. It was me reclaiming my worth. It was me saying I will not be invisible anymore. The year before had already carved the first wound, but this year was the blade turned deeper, twisted, until it reached my soul. I need you to see how betrayal does not arrive all at once. It builds layer upon layer like snow piling on a roof, until one day the weight collapses everything. Last Christmas was the beginning of that collapse. I had arrived early, clutching my sweet potato pie in a tin wrapped with foil, the same pie Marcus used to hover near the oven for when he was a boy. I wore my best red sweater, the one I saved for holidays, and I thought foolishly that this would be a moment of joy, a memory to carry me through the lonely winter nights. But when I stepped inside, the warmth did not greet me. Instead, Isabella looked up from her champagne glass, her lips curling as though the sight of me were a mistake. "Oh," she said, voice as sharp as glass. "You made pie. We already had the caterer bring desserts. Organic, gluten-free. We can't have the children eating that much sugar." Her mother, perched in pearls at the dining table, gave a delicate laugh as though I were a child who had brought the wrong toy to school. My hands tightened around the pie tin. Marcus walked in, thin, tall, confident smelling of cologne I had once bought him for his birthday. He kissed Isabella on the cheek, poured himself champagne, and did not even notice the way I stood frozen by the door. The table was set with crystal plates, polished silver candles flickering in tall holders. Every chair was marked with a name card except one. A folding chair pushed near the back door where the draft cut through each time someone went outside for a smoke. That was where Isabella gestured for me. "You can sit there, Gloria. It's closer to the kitchen." I swallowed the bitterness burning my throat. I sat. My knees touched the cold metal, my shoulders brushed the draft. When I set my pie on the counter untouched, Isabella whispered to her sister loud enough for me to hear. "Some people don't understand presentation." Marcus laughed at a joke his father-in-law told. He raised his glass, toasted to family. I nearly choked on the word. That night, I went home and told myself it was just one evening, just one insult. Maybe next year would be different. But next year came, and instead of an invitation, I received exile. The message on my phone, "We weren't expecting you," was not only cruel, it was calculated. It told me I had been erased, deleted, deemed unnecessary. All the years of sacrifice had not earned me a seat at the table. My son had chosen silence over defense, absence over presence, shame over love. And it was not just Christmas. Birthdays came and went with nothing more than a curt phone call. Mother's Day arrived with a delivery of flowers Isabella had clearly ordered online, a sterile gesture devoid of meaning. I longed for Marcus to show up at my door to sit with me the way he used to when he was 10 years old, asking me questions about the world, resting his head on my shoulder. Instead, he sent money transfers mechanical and cold, as if I were an employee being paid to stay quiet. The betrayal was not in one message, not in one holiday. It was in every silent moment he chose his wife's disdain over his mother's devotion. It was in every shrug when Isabella mocked my food, my clothes, my voice. It was in every glance he avoided when I looked at him searching for the boy I once knew. This year, when he told me not to come, it was as if he had locked the door of his house and thrown the key into the snow. But here is the truth: I had been locked out long before. The message only confirmed it. I remember staring at the phone, the glow lighting up the lines on my hands, hands that had carried him as a baby, hands that had wiped tears, cooked meals, signed checks. And I thought so. This is what motherhood means to him: $80,000 a year, a lifeline he takes for granted, while I am not even worthy of a chair at his table. My chest burned with fury. I could hear Maria's voice in my head, my late husband telling me, "Gloria, you've done enough. Let him fall. Let him learn." I had ignored that voice for years. I had held Marcus up even when he spat on the hands that steadied him, but the betrayal had reached a point beyond forgiveness. Do you know what it feels like to realize your own child is ashamed of you? To realize that the people who should be your comfort see you as a burden? It is a pain sharper than any scalpel, heavier than any shift I ever worked in that hospital. It is a wound that no medicine can heal. And yet, as that wound opened wider, a new strength bled through. I was done begging. I was done waiting. I was done financing my own erasure. So I looked at the screen. I looked at the numbers that had flowed from me to him year after year, and I said aloud, "Not anymore." The words echoed in the empty kitchen, but they did not sound weak. They sounded final. The betrayal had escalated from whispers to exclusion, from humiliation to erasure, and now it would be answered. Because if my son wanted a Christmas without his mother, then he would soon learn what life without her money looked like. The night after I cut him off, I sat at my kitchen table. I had kept every bank statement, every wire transfer. At first, it had been habit that you terrified of overdrawing your account. Later, it became evidence, though I did not yet know against whom. Now, under the dim glow of a single lamp, those papers became my witnesses. I ran my finger down the columns of numbers. Each monthly transfer, $6,666, neat as clockwork. Every line was proof of my devotion, my belief that Marcus just needed time, just needed a little more help to stand tall. But as the pages stacked higher, the reality settled heavier on my chest. In 5 years, I had handed my son nearly $400,000. $400,000. Enough to buy myself a house, outright enough to retire, and comfort enough to secure a future where I was not eating canned soup alone. Instead, it had gone to him and through him to Isabella. I pulled out credit card statements next. My name wasn't on them, but the charges were familiar. Spa weekends in Napa Valley, ski trips in Aspen, designer handbags, Tesla payments, country club dues. My $80,000 had not gone to necessity. It had not gone to groceries or medicine or emergencies. It had gone to status, to glitter, to a lifestyle that sneered at me while it drained me. One statement made my breath catch, a charge to Evergreen Country Club. I remembered once asking Marcus about it, and he had waved his hand. It's just networking, Mom, good for my career. But I had never been invited there, never once been shown the manicured lawns or the poolside where Isabella posed for her photos. I was paying for doors that remained closed in my face. I leaned back in my chair, rage pounding against my ribs. This was not just ungratefulness. This was exploitation. They had built their image of success on my back, and now that they no longer needed the illusion of my presence, they had discarded me. My eyes landed on those mortgage papers tucked in another folder. The truth hit me like a hammer. I had co-signed for that mortgage. My name was right there, bold on the dotted line. Without my signature, without my credit, they never would have gotten that house. My allowance had been covering not just their luxuries, but the very roof over their heads. Suddenly, the message on my phone looked different. "We weren't expecting you for Christmas." It was not simply a dismissal. It was arrogance born of false security. They thought the house was theirs alone. They thought the money would flow forever. They thought wrong. I pulled out a fresh sheet of paper and began writing line by line the total of every sacrifice. $40,000 for tuition, $10,000 for books, $12,000 for the car, $25,000 for the down payment, $10,000 for the wedding, $400,000 in allowance. The numbers blurred as my eyes filled, but I kept writing until the page trembled in my hands. $500,000. I had given my son $500,000 in one form or another. And what had he given me? A folding chair by the drafty door. A text telling me not to come. I whispered into the silence, "Maria, I wish you could see this." I could almost hear my late husband's voice, steady and low. "Gloria, you've done enough. Stop now. Let him carry his own weight." For years, I had ignored that wisdom. But now the evidence was too clear to deny. I gathered the papers into a neat stack, slid them into a folder, and tapped the cover. This was no longer just my heartbreak. This was my case. If they thought I was powerless, they had forgotten that money leaves a trail, and I held every breadcrumb. I imagined the look on Isabella's face when she saw the figures in black and white, when the whispers of greedy and entitled turned back toward her. I imagined Marcus fumbling for his wallet at some dinner, handing over a card that no longer had my safety net beneath it. Declined, declined, declined. The thought did not soothe me completely. It did not erase the years of sacrifice, but it steadied me. Because now I knew that my revenge would not be shouting. It would not be slamming doors. It would be paper ink and undeniable truth. It would be justice in numbers, justice they could not spin or laugh away. I slid the folder into my bag, zipped it shut, and whispered, "This Christmas, the truth comes to dinner." I did not sleep that night. The folder sat on the table like a silent companion daring me to act. By dawn, my decision was carved in stone. I would not simply cut the allowance and fade into the shadows. I would not allow Marcus and Isabella to rewrite the narrative painting me as bitter, difficult, or unwanted. No. If they wanted to erase me, I would make sure the ink of truth stained their hands in front of everyone they respected. The first step was to call Harold Green. He was 70 years old, a retired lawyer from the neighborhood and an old friend of my late husband. Harold had attended our wedding, had visited the hospital when Marcus was born, had even offered to review my finances when Maria fell sick, but I had been too proud back then. Pride had cost me years of silence. This time, I swallowed it. Gloria, Harold said when he picked up his voice gravelly but sharp as ever. "It's been too long. I need your eyes on some papers," I told him. "I need your mind on a problem I should have solved years ago." He did not ask questions, just invited me over. His study smelled of leather and dust books lining every wall. I laid the folder on his desk, and for an hour he read in silence, page after page, his frown deepening. Finally, he looked at me. "$500,000, Gloria? You've handed that boy $500,000 and now he tells you not to come to Christmas." His tone burned with indignation. I nodded, shame prickling my skin. I thought I was helping. I thought I was keeping him afloat. Harold leaned back. "You weren't keeping him afloat. You were letting him drown you. And Isabella, she's got her claws in this. Every cent you gave only built her ladder higher." He tapped the mortgage documents. "Here's the key. Your name is on this loan. You've got legal standing. If you withdraw support, if you present these records, Marcus doesn't just lose an allowance. He risks foreclosure. You could bring this whole charade down." The words settled like fire in my chest. Foreclosure. The house that had been my dream gift to him, the house that carried my signature, could just as easily become the rope that pulled him back to reality. "But Gloria," Harold said, lowering his voice, "this isn't just about money. This is about dignity. You need to decide if you're ready to face him publicly, because that's where this is heading." I closed my eyes, saw the folding chair by the drafty door, heard Isabella's laugh, saw Marcus raise his glass without glancing my way. My jaw tightened. I'm ready. We drafted letters to the bank, notifying them that I was terminating my financial support. Harold explained that without my monthly contributions, Marcus would default within 60 days. The bank would not be kind, not with interest rates climbing and payments missed. Marcus thought he owned that house. In truth, he only rented stability from me, and I had just canceled the lease. But paperwork alone was not enough. This had to be seen, had to be known, because in families like mine, reputation was currency. Marcus and Isabella had polished theirs with my money, strutting through country clubs and holiday parties as if their success was self-made. The truth had to shatter that illusion, so we planned the reveal. Christmas dinner. I would arrive uninvited, carrying not just my sweet potato pie, but also the folder. Harold insisted on coming with me as silent witness, his presence unaware. "Timing is everything," Harold said, his eyes sharp. "Wait until they're comfortable, until the guests are settled. Then present it. Calm, firm, let the numbers speak." The thought both thrilled and terrified me. I had spent a lifetime avoiding confrontation, bending myself to keep peace. But peace had cost me too much. It was time for war, not with fists, not with shouting, but with evidence. In the days leading up to Christmas, I rehearsed. I stood in front of the mirror folder in hand and spoke the words aloud. 5 years, $80,000 a year, paid in full by me. My voice trembled at first, but with each repetition it grew steadier, stronger, until even the walls seemed to respect it. I baked my sweet potato pie, the same recipe that had once been mocked, because this time it was not about pleasing anyone's palate. It was a symbol, a reminder of tradition and love they had discarded. I wrapped it in foil, placed it carefully in my bag beside the folder. Christmas morning dawned cold and bright. I dressed in my best black coat, pressed and neat, a red scarf around my neck. I looked at myself one last time in the mirror and whispered, "You are not invisible." On the way to Marcus's house, my heart pounded with every mile. Harold sat beside me, his cane resting across his knees. "You're doing the right thing," he said softly. It's time he faced the truth. When we pulled into the driveway, I saw the house glowing with lights, guests already milling inside. Laughter spilled out into the night. I gripped the handle of the pie, the folder heavy under my arm. Marcus opened the door, his smile faltering when he saw me. "Mom, I told you." I stepped past him before he could finish. The warmth of the house hit me along with the sharp scent of cinnamon and wine. Isabella froze by the table, her champagne glass halfway to her lips. Her mother narrowed her eyes. "Gloria," Isabella said tightly. "We weren't expecting." "No," I interrupted, my voice steady, ringing louder than I expected. "You weren't. But I'm here." The room hushed. Guests turned. I set the pie down on the table, then placed the folder beside it. My hands no longer shook. This was no longer sacrifice. This was justice, and it was only beginning. The air in the room shifted the moment I laid the folder on the table. Conversations died mid-sentence. Forks hovered above plates. Laughter dissolved into silence. Isabella's painted smile faltered, her glass clinking softly as she set it down. Marcus moved toward me, voice strained. "Mom, this isn't the time." But I had waited too many years, swallowed too many insults, sat on too many folding chairs in the cold. My time had finally come. I looked around the room, letting my eyes sweep over the faces, Isabella's family dressed in silk and pearls, neighbors who had been invited to admire the Mitchell's success, colleagues of Marcus who believed the facade. I wanted each of them to hear. I wanted each of them to know. I opened the folder slowly, deliberately, the sound of paper rustling loud in the hush. I pulled out the first set of statements, crisp and undeniable. My voice was clear. For 5 years, I have transferred $80,000 every single year to Marcus and Isabella. That is $400,000. $400,000 I earned with my own hands, my own sweat from decades of nursing shifts. Gasps rippled across the room. Isabella's mother shifted uncomfortably in her chair. Isabella herself went pale, then flushed, deep red. Marcus stepped forward, hissing under his breath. "Mom, stop this right now." I did not. I turned the page, showing the line of transactions. Every month without fail, I wired $6,666. It paid your mortgage. It paid your car. It paid for this champagne, this catering, these lights strung around the house. I raised my eyes, my voice steady. "And tonight, you told me I was not expected." The words hung there like thunder. The guests murmured eyes darting from Marcus to Isabella. A neighbor whispered $500,000 from his own mother. Isabella tried to laugh, brittle and sharp. "Gloria, really, is this necessary? We don't discuss money at the table." I fixed her with a stare. "You didn't mind discussing my food, did you? You didn't mind mocking me last year in front of your guests. You didn't mind putting me on a folding chair by the door, but tonight the truth will sit at this table whether you like it or not." Marcus's jaw tightened. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his wallet, and held up a credit card as if to prove a point. "Fine. You think we depend on you? Watch this." He strode to the caterer who was clearing plates. "Charge this for the evening. Would you 10,000 on me?" All eyes followed the transaction. The caterer slid the card, the machine beeped, and then came the sound that cracked the illusion wide open. Declined. The room stilled. The caterer tried again. Declined. Marcus's face drained of color. Isabella's hand flew to her mouth. The murmurs grew into a low roar. "Declined," someone repeated. On Christmas, Marcus snatched the card back, fumbling for another. He tried again. Declined. The machine's screen might as well have been a judge's gavel slamming down. I folded my hands over the stack of papers and spoke clearly so no one could mistake my words. "You see, I ended the allowance 2 nights ago. The bank was notified. Without my contributions, the account has nothing to support it. The house, the cars, the vacations, all of it was propped up by me. And it ends now." The humiliation was complete. Marcus stood frozen, his pride collapsing in front of friends, colleagues, and in-laws. Isabella turned on him, hissing, "You told me we were secure. You told me we didn't need her." He muttered, voice cracking, We had it covered." But his words rang hollow against the evidence in my hands. I stepped forward closer to the table and placed the statements down where everyone could see. I loved my son. I gave him everything I had. But love cannot be bought and respect cannot be ignored. If you cannot give me a chair at your table, then you cannot expect me to pay for the table itself." The guests avoided Marcus's eyes. Some shook their heads, others whispered, "Unbelievable." Isabella's father cleared his throat awkwardly, muttering something about needing air, and slipped out. The evening that had begun as a polished display of wealth had curdled into scandal. Marcus's voice broke through, desperate. "Mom, please not here." "Here is exactly where it belongs," I cut in firm. "Because for years you've lived off my silence. Tonight, silence ends." The tension snapped like a wire. Isabella stormed toward the kitchen, muttering curses, her heels striking the tile like gunshots. Marcus slumped into a chair, his face buried in his hands. The guests shifted uncomfortably, unsure whether to stay or flee. I gathered my folder, tucked it back into my bag, and turned to the room. "Merry Christmas," I said evenly. "May yours be filled with honesty." I picked up my sweet potato pie untouched on the counter and held it close. I did not need their approval anymore. I had brought my truth and I had spoken it. As I walked out the door, I heard the murmurs rising, the gossip already taking shape. The Mitchells were not welcomed by their own marriage. Their empire was built on the widow, and now the foundation was gone. Harold, who had stood silently in the doorway the whole time, met me on the porch. He shook his head. "Well done, Gloria. Very well done." I exhaled the cold night air filling my lungs like freedom. Inside the house still glowed with lights, but it no longer blinded me. For the first time, the night was mine. The cold air bit at my cheeks as I stood on the porch with Harold, the folder heavy at my side, and the pie cradled in my arms. But before I could step off the stoop, the door creaked open behind me. Marcus stumbled out, his face ashen, his voice thick with desperation. "Mom, wait." I turned slowly, the porch light casting a harsh glow over his features. He looked smaller than he ever had, stripped of the arrogance that had cloaked him inside that house. His shoulders hunched, his eyes darted like a trapped animal. "Mom, please," he stammered, lowering his voice so the guests would not hear. "You didn't have to do that, not in front of everyone." I set the pie down on the railing, folded my arms, and let the silence hang. For once, I wanted him to feel the weight of words unspoken. He pressed on, panic seeping through. "You've embarrassed me. You've embarrassed Isabella. How do you think this looks?" My colleagues were in there, her family, everyone we know. My chest tightened, but not with pity, with fury. "Embarrassed you, Marcus. I carried you through life. I paid your bills. I saved you from collectors, from eviction, from shame. And you dare to talk to me about embarrassment. The only shame in that room tonight was yours." He flinched, eyes wet. "I didn't mean to cut you out. Isabella thought. "Stop!" I snapped, my voice sharper than I intended, but I did not regret it. "Do not hide behind her. You're 34 years old. You're a husband, supposedly a man, and yet you let your wife dictate whether your mother is welcome at Christmas. You let her mock me. You let her seat me by the draft. You let her erase me, and you said nothing." "Nothing." He opened his mouth, closed it again, jaw trembling. For the first time in years, he looked like the boy who used to fear disappointing me, not the man who had grown accustomed to using me. "Do you know what I wanted tonight, Marcus?" I asked, my voice quieter now, the anger tempered with raw truth. "I wanted one thing, a seat at my son's table. Not the head, not the throne, just a chair. And you denied me even that. You gave me exile instead. So don't talk to me about humiliation. I've been humiliated for years. Tonight the truth finally caught up with you." He took a shaky step forward, lowering his voice. "I can fix this. I'll talk to the bank. I cut him off with a raised hand. "No, you cannot fix this. Because this is not about banks or mortgages or accounts. This is about respect, Marcus, and you lost mine. You had $500,000 of my sacrifice, and you spent every cent pretending you were better than me. But without me, you're not just broke. You're hollow." His face crumpled. For a flicker of a moment, I thought I saw the boy he once was. The boy who held my hand after Maria died, who whispered he'd take care of me someday. But that boy was gone, buried under years of entitlement and silence. "Please," he whispered, voice cracking, "don't do this to me." I felt the sting of tears, but they did not fall. I straightened my shoulders. "No, Marcus, you did this to yourself." Harold cleared his throat softly beside me, the sound like a gavel. Marcus's eyes flicked to him, realizing at last that I was not alone, that there were witnesses beyond the crowd inside. "You'll regret this," Marcus muttered, but the words lacked venom. They sagged under the weight of truth. "No," I said firmly. "The only thing I regret is not doing it sooner." For a long moment, none of us moved. The muffled sounds of the party filtered through the door, strained laughter, whispered gossip, the clinking of glasses, trying to salvage a broken evening. Finally, I picked up the pie, balanced it carefully, and looked my son in the eye. "Merry Christmas, Marcus. May it teach you what money never could." I turned, descended the steps slowly, each one steady final. Harold followed his cane, tapping against the wood like punctuation. Marcus stayed on the porch, his silhouette framed in the doorway, a man who had built his castle on sand and was watching it crumble in real time. As we reached the car, Harold placed a hand on my arm. "You did what needed doing, Gloria. He may hate you tonight, but one day he'll understand." I shook my head, sliding into the seat. Whether he understands or not isn't my burden anymore. Tonight, I laid it down. The engine hummed to life. The house receded in the rearview mirror, still glowing with lights that now looked garish, hollow, false. For the first time in years, I felt lighter even as my heart ached. The climax had come and gone, the truth unleashed, and all that remained was the path forward, mine, not his. The drive back to my apartment was quiet, the city glowing with holiday lights, but none of them felt heavy anymore. For years, I had stared at those lights and felt the weight of loneliness, the ache of giving everything and still being unseen. Tonight, the glow looked different, not mocking, not distant, but gentle. It was as though the world itself was reminding me that sometimes you have to burn bridges so the light can show you a new road. When Harold dropped me off, I insisted he take half the pie. He chuckled, patting my hand. "Gloria, you keep it. You earned the right to enjoy your own cooking without someone turning up their nose." I smiled a real smile that stretched across my face, not the forced one I had worn at Isabella's table. As his car pulled away, I stood in the crisp air, feeling the silence of freedom. Upstairs, the apartment, it was small but warm. On the counter sat a bottle of wine my neighbor Rosa had given me wrapped in red tissue. She was 70, a widow like me, and she had invited me countless times to her gatherings. I had always declined waiting for an invitation from Marcus instead, waiting for a seat at a table that was never truly mine. But tonight, I realized where I belonged. I picked up the phone and dialed Rosa. She answered on the second ring, her voice bright. "Gloria, are you all right? We heard music from down the hall and thought maybe you'd stopped by." "I'm coming now," I said simply. Her laugh warmed me. "Good. Bring that pie of yours. I've got folks here who will appreciate it." Within minutes, I was standing in Rosa's apartment. The air smelled of cinnamon and roasted ham. Laughter bubbled from the living room, and holiday music played softly in the background. People greeted me with hugs, with warmth, with the kind of welcome that asked for nothing but my presence. When I set the pie on the table, a man clapped his hands. "Sweet potato pie! You just saved Christmas, Gloria." No one mocked. No one looked down their nose. No one shoved me into a corner. For the first time in years, I felt like family. Not blood family, but chosen family. And sometimes that's the kind that saves you. As the night wore on, I found myself laughing, telling stories from my nursing days, listening to Rosa's grandchildren sing carols. I drank wine, I ate food, seasoned with love, and I felt the ache in my chest ease. The ghosts of betrayal were still there, but they no longer chained me. Later, as midnight approached, Rosa sat beside me, her hand warm on mine. "You look lighter tonight," she said softly. I laid down a burden I admitted, one I carried too long. She nodded. Family can wound you deeper than anyone, but sometimes the healing comes from finding new family. Her words sank deep. She was right. I had spent decades trying to prove my worth to a son who measured me only in dollars. I had begged for respect at a table that had no seat for me. But tonight, I sat at a table where I was welcome, where my worth was not counted in bank transfers, but in laughter and presence. I raised my glass, then not of champagne, but of simple red wine. "To respect," I said. "To truth. To freedom." The others clinked their glasses against mine, and for the first time in years, I felt the toast belonged to me. When I returned home, the apartment was still quiet, but it no longer felt empty. I set the pie tin down, poured myself one last glass of wine, and looked out the window at the city lights. Somewhere across town, Marcus was reeling from the collapse of his illusion. Isabella was seething. Their guests were gossiping. Their empire had cracked. But it was no longer my concern. I whispered into the night, "Merry Christmas, Maria." My husband's name rolled off my tongue like a prayer. I did it. I stood up. I chose myself. And in that moment, peace settled over me. Not the fragile peace of silence and submission, but the solid peace of reclaiming my dignity. For too long, I had believed my worth was measured in what I gave. Tonight, I realized it was measured in what I refused to give away anymore. My respect, my pride, my seat at the table of my own life. This was not just revenge, it was rebirth. So that was my Christmas. Not the one I had imagined, not the one I begged for, but the one I needed. It was the night I finally stopped trying to earn a place at someone else's table and built my own instead. My son thought he could erase me with a message. Instead, I erased the illusion he lived on. Money can buy a house, a car, a vacation, but it cannot buy respect. And respect is the one thing I will never give away for free again. If you've ever felt like me, used, silenced, pushed to the corner, remember this. Your value isn't defined by what you give to people who don't appreciate you. It's defined by how you stand when you finally say enough. Now, I want to hear from you. Where are you watching this from, and what time is it right now? I love knowing how far these stories travel and how many of you are listening at the exact moment you need to hear them. If my story spoke to you, hit that like button and don't forget to subscribe. We share these stories not just to vent pain, but to remind each other we are not alone. Family can betray you, but chosen family, whether it's neighbors, friends, or even strangers who understand, can lift you back up. So tell me in the comments, have you ever had to walk away from people who never respected you? I'll be reading every single one. And to all of you, wherever you are, Merry Christmas.